Well, Carey, we've given you a proper introduction prior to us jumping on here, but I just have to say, first of all, one of the things that's been fascinating for me up close, we were in a call group, monthly call group for a couple of years together. And that was the season where you were transitioning from being the lead pastor of Connexus there in Canada to what you're doing now, which is remarkable, the way in which you're helping leaders all across the country. In fact, I tell friends of mine that your rise to influence in the leadership and Christian leadership world is insane. And you're so humble, so I'm not going to ask you a question about that, but I'm interested. I think part of it is not only, and we gave a list of a bunch of amazing people you have in your podcast. I think your guests on your podcast are second to none. The lineup that you have of people that you bring in, your team just does a fantastic job lining up the right people. But you say this on your podcast, you say that your goal is to have the conversation with people that your audience would want to have with them if they were sitting down with them. And I just think you do a remarkable job of that, because every time I listen to one of your podcasts, I think that's exactly the question I would have asked.
I'm glad. Sometimes I listen back and I'm like, oh, please ask her this, or please ask him this. And most of the time I do, like because you do a lot of interviews, you kind of forget. And then occasionally I forget and I'm like, well, blew that interview. But anyway, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I just wrapped up an almost 2-hour conversation with John Mark Comer. And at the end of it, he's like, man, I don't know whether I was rambly or not. I'm like, dude, that was amazing. And I never edit, like, unless the guest says, hey, can you cut that out? Then I'll cut that out. But I never edit the interview, because that's what real life conversations are like. They're not like 5-minute sound bites or, okay, now we got to go to commercial.
Yeah,
so,
100%.
And I had the privilege, as you have too, Joel, of meeting a lot of leaders in the green room and at speaking events. And you have those conversations. And I used to leave always going, I wish everybody could have heard it, or I wish my board could have heard it, or I wish whoever. And so now we get to do that for people who are listening.
Well,
so
you are so good at that. And that concept right there is true. There's a lot of people who would not only want to hear it, but would benefit from hearing it. And so that's what you bring to the surface. And that makes interviewing you terrifying, because I sit here thinking, he's probably thinking I'm terrible at this because he's like the expert at this, but I'm going to press through anyway. So
you can ask me anything.
You
Joel.
have a
We've
brand
known
new
each other
book
a
coming
long
out
time.
called At Your Best, and I just started reading it. It's fantastic so far, and you were kind enough to send me an executive summary of the book, and we're going to spend most of our time talking about that, but I thoroughly enjoyed, and I've told you this before, but I thoroughly enjoyed Didn't See It Coming. It was personally incredibly impactful and helpful for me. I not only read the book, but got to hear you speak on it. And so I'm excited for our audience today to hear a little bit about this book and why you wrote it and the core ideas in this book. And hopefully today will motivate all of them to want to go purchase the book. The book drops September 14th. Do they still say that?
It does.
That things drop? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, it
Okay.
drops. Sure. I never have an album, so let's make the book.
There
drop.
we go. It drops. It drops September 14th. Anywhere you can buy a book. And this book is all about how to get time, energy, and priorities to work for you. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to start with this concept. You make this statement or this observation that it doesn't seem like in our lifetime there's ever been a time when people have been more overwhelmed, more overcommitted, or more overworked. And I'm curious your perspective on, like, how did we get there in the culture? Like, what were the dynamics that created that in our society to get to this point?
Well, a bunch of things have happened. We've been trending in that direction for decades. Stress, burnout was a term invented in the 1970s to describe a condition that medical doctors were suffering because they had, terrible internships and long shifts and on call and the whole deal. So it was coined in the 70s, which is only 50 years ago, to describe medical problems that doctors were having. And then it kind of spread to the workplace. But I think what's happened in the last 15 years is it's not a workplace condition. It is totally, people get burned out at work, but I think it's become a life condition. And I'm a big fan of technology. We're having this conversation through technology. I think we've all seen in the last few years that it's a double-edged sword. And I think one of the problems now is the devices in our pockets. And the book came out of a burnout season that I had in 2006. So I had a BlackBerry at the time that could barely access the internet. Okay. You got like a quarter of a web page really slowly.
I remember.
So it was a dumb phone, not a smartphone. And even without, having an iPhone and all these devices and instant connectivity, I burned out all by myself. But I think what's made it really bad over the last decade is the lines between work and home have blurred. So for everybody working at whatever, in the marketplace, in the church, at a not-for-profit, you used to have to go to the office. Like when I was in law, I was only in it briefly. But if you took a file home, you had to take a file home, like a big dossier home with you. And then you better bring it back or you're going to get fired because there was like one copy of it, right? So don't lose those documents, those pleadings. You don't want to lose those. And we did it rarely, like only if you had a really big case the next day would you take a file home. Well, now we take all of our files home with us everywhere and we take them to the beach and we take them to bed. And the line used to go to the office. Now the office goes to you. And so I think that has been a massive thing. And along with that, if you want to talk about it, the number of contacts we have. Robin Dunbar is an evolutionary psychologist out of England. And he wrote a book, I think it's called How Many Friends Can One Person Have? And he makes the argument, they call it Dunbar's number now in psychology, that you can have 150 friends. And he says you can have 3 to 5 really good friends. You can have up to 15 friends, like people maybe you see once a month or you check in with or on your regular rotation, and about 150 people that you would know by name. You kind of know their dogs' names. You send them Christmas cards if you still do that. Like they're kind of in your network and you know about them, not just like, oh yeah, that was some random guy I went to high school with. And what social media has done, he wrote this book over a decade ago. Social media was still in its infancy, but he says social media has blown that through the roof. And now, you're getting hit up all the time, wherever you are. And people don't have generally good boundaries about when to say no. And when I was writing the book, went through multiple drafts. And one day I just sat down and I counted up the number of inboxes I have. So we all think, I have an email inbox. I have 11. I have 11 because every social media platform has an inbox now. You have notifications on your phone, which I suggest you turn off. So all of that leaves people feeling overwhelmed, overworked, and overcommitted.
Yeah. Wow. And what's interesting about that is I think you kind of gave us the history of the burnout idea. For so long, we've associated burnout with like midlife crisis. Like it's like the corporate executives in their 40s who have been going after it, and now they've got more responsibility, more bills, more kids, more stuff that's riding on them, and they run to this place of burnout. But the data doesn't show that today. It's like people in their 20s and 30s like burning out early in life. So I think what you're saying is like totally true.
Yeah, there is still a correlation between that midlife crisis and burnout, but you're right. I remember the first time I presented what would become some of this material. This is 5 or 6 years ago, maybe further in Atlanta, talking about my burnout story. And I remember I prefaced that there were 1,000 people in the audience. And I remember prefacing my talk by saying, hey, if you're under 40, this isn't going to apply to you, talking about burnout. Take a few notes, pull them out a decade from now, dust them off, and it'll make more sense. So I talked all about my burnout episode in 2006, When I was finished, there was a long line of 20 to 25-year-olds waiting to talk to me. Some of them with tears in their eyes going, no, it's not a 40-something issue. I'm feeling it. And that was years ago. And you're right. The stats now is reading a Deloitte study. So in mid-2021, I would make an argument that 2021 was harder than 2020. And I'm not trying to minimize people who lost friends to COVID or family members to COVID. I'm not trying to minimize the catastrophe that was last year. But I think we are now dealing with the ripple hangover effects. We have ungrieved losses. Life is not back to normal. It's completely unstable. What's this variant? Okay. And when Delta's gone, we'll figure out the next one. We'll eventually get, to Epsilon or something like that. And it's just so destabilizing for people to the point where in this Deloitte study, 82% of executives say they go home and this is current, this is like summer 2021. 82% of executives go home every day feeling mentally and physically exhausted. 59% say they can't relax, and 49% can't sleep. So that's executives. Like, wow. And this is 2021. We're supposed to be coming out of this. I think we have been so collectively traumatized. And it's true of Gen Z. I interviewed Jean Twenge for my podcast, University of San Diego researcher who studied, she had articles in the Atlantic and so on. She studied teen trends for 25 years. And she said there has never been a more traumatized, anxious, nervous generation than Gen Z who are experiencing the signs of burnout. So this is just everywhere. And it is, not to play with words, but it's an epidemic and we're all feeling it. Can I say one more thing about burnout?
Yeah.
And this would be interesting for the audience. I'll give you the link at the end, but I have a free burnout assessment. It's not medical, not a doctor, not a psychologist. We've run thousands of people through this, and it's fascinating to see the result. People think of burnout in the classic way I had it in '06. Your life grinds to a halt. You can't think. You have trouble getting out of bed. Your passion is gone. And basically you're like, I think I need to go see a doctor. I went to see a counselor over it. So you think my life is at a crashing halt. I think there's a condition called mid-grade burnout or low-grade burnout. And I think most people have it. And the simple working definition I have for low-grade burnout is the functions of life continue, but the joy of life is gone. So you're going to work every day. You're getting up, you're going to the kids' games, you're going to the school plays, you're doing all that stuff. You're going to work out at the gym, but you don't feel it. You are numb. And so joy's gone, functions continue. That also is burnout. And I think it can be prevented, and I think you can recover from it. I did, and it's been 15 years. And so what At Your Best is the system I developed the hard way, counselors, coaches, trial and error, tears, that got me way more effective and productive. And then as people began to ask me, why are you getting so much done? I started to share the story, and they're like, I'm going to try that. And turns out it works for a lot of other people. So
let's talk about that. I want to jump into some of that content from the book, because there is something that you sort of present as a, hey, this is a common experience among people who move to this place where the functions of life are continuing, yet the joy of life is gone. And you call it the stress spiral. People get caught up in the stress spiral. Can you explain a little bit of what that is? There's three dynamics involved in the stress spiral. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So you're in the stress spiral when on more than an occasional basis, you feel overwhelmed, overcommitted, and overworked. You have too much to do. You don't know what to do. You can't make sense of it. Your to-do list is almost useless because there's just too much stuff, and you are dragging your knuckles through most days. And it happens because we all have three primary assets. Every day we get the gift of time, energy, and we have to manage priorities. So those are the things we manage every day: time, energy, and priorities. In the stress spiral, when you're living in an unsustainable way, your time is unfocused, your energy never gets leveraged, and your priorities keep getting hijacked. So they're always hijacked by other people, by urgent things. And so that's the stress spiral.
Yeah. So the thing that I love about this, as you talk about these, is I think it's easy to sort of begin to think, oh, wait, so you're talking about like time management, like, and it's much more than that. Like it's easy to dismiss as, oh, so if I just manage my time better, like I would be in a healthier place, or I wouldn't get into this spiral. But you don't say this, but I feel like the thing that you bring into this conversation is more than even time or what I do, my priorities, is my energy. Can you talk a little bit about managing energy?
Yeah, well, let's say a little bit about time first, then we'll get to energy. Okay. Yeah, I was a really good time manager when I burned out. And that was the problem is I was leading a very rapidly growing organization, and my terrible formula, which is a natural formula, was more people equals more hours. If I'm responsible for more people, I just put in more hours. And you can get more efficient, but time management doesn't make you more effective. And there are a million really good time management books out there. And I imagine most of the audience has read them. So they know what's going on. So that's when I got into energy management. And I started to notice that was like the Archimedes lever that kind of moved everything in my world. So if you think about your typical day, we all get 24 hours in a day, but not all hours feel equal or produce equally. So I'm a morning person. How about you, Joel? What are you?
I didn't used to be, but I am now. I tell people, I've started telling people now, I'm officially think I'm old because I'm only 46, but like, I guess this is how you know. I get up in the morning and I walk. So like I don't run anymore. I don't bike. I just get up and walk, and I get up really early and walk, and it's like really good for me. Like that setting, and this isn't everybody, but for me to think through my day, to pray through my day, to envision the conversations I'm going to have, to be prepared. I just walk into my day so much better. I sometimes I listen to worship music. Sometimes I listen to your podcast. Actually, sometimes I listen to the Bible. Just listen to somebody read me the Bible. So that, but it's a really important time for me. So from a morning standpoint, prepping for my day makes me way more productive.
Morning person here too, but I'm sure there's some night owls in the crowd, and there's probably some people who are like, no, my peak is midday. But here's the key, and this is sobering. Us humans have about 3 to 5 peak hours of productivity a day. That's it, 3 to 5. And I always thought I was superhuman. I was robotic and I could go like 8 or 10 hours. But you write messages most weekends. I've written books. And I don't know, I was talking about this with a friend of mine who's written a couple of New York Times bestselling books. I'm like, can you write for 14 hours a day? And he just laughed. He's like, no, people who think you can write for 14 hours a day have never written. Cal Newport has verified this. Brain search research verifies this. I was talking to Claire Diaz-Ortiz, who was one of the early employees at Twitter. And she said, even the most brilliant computer coders in the world have about 3 hours of code in them every day. That is really good and not jumbled. And so if you think about it, those hours for me, they'll be different for every member of the audience, happen between 3 to 5, 7 to 11 a.m. in the morning. Cal Newport sets the limit at 4 hours of deep work. You can argue back and forth. And we're not robots. So what do you do with those peak hours, right? Like if you're writing a message, let's pick on preachers for a minute. You're writing a message, that's coming Sunday. Like you're either ready or you're not. And Monday comes, you're a morning person. So you go for your walk, and then somebody has a breakfast meeting with you. So you go for breakfast meeting, and you know how breakfast meetings work. They're always supposed to be an hour. They go an hour and a half. Then you stop by your favorite coffee shop. You go in and get your cold brew for the office. You get into the office, people chit chat with you. And then you sit down at your desk. It's 10 a.m. You're like, I got to write. And then you're like, oh, I got to check email. And then there's like a fire or whatever you got to deal with on staff. Then it's lunch. Then you have some meetings. It's 4 o'clock. You haven't touched your message. And you're like, I got to get something on paper before I go home. And you're exhausted. You're tired. And all night long, you're thinking about, I got to write my message. And then rinse, lather, repeat. Here comes Tuesday. Same thing happens. Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, you're like, I got to get this thing done. You hobble something together and away you go. Well, as well. I'm not saying that never happens to you, Joel, ever. I know that never happens to you.
Never.
But that is such a predictable pattern in our lives that we use our best energy hours to do random things. Now, what the book says, what I'm suggesting, think about your day in 3 zones: yellow, green, and red zones. Green zone, you're at your best. You're alert. You're in the flow. You're excited to do some work. Red zone is, for me, late afternoon when you're kind of dragging your knuckles and you either need a nap, caffeine, or a run, like one of the 3, because you're just not going to get through that meeting. And then yellow zone is everything in between. So red zone, you're exhausted. You need to take a break or a nap or something. It's usually 1 or 2 hours a day. Yellow zone is everything in between. So there's a lot of yellow in a work week. And the secret, I think, to energy management is you should do what you're best at when you're at your best. So if you're at your best in the morning, do what you are best at. In your case, that's probably communication, vision, team alignment, making sure there's enough money to do what you need to do. And those are the jobs of a senior leader. In my case, it's very similar. I have to make sure that I'm producing great content, that I actually do my podcast interviews in my yellow zone, because I do my prep in the green zone. Prep is more important than the interview. Your yellow zone, you're still okay. But I can hold a conversation, an engaging conversation with someone when I'm not fully at my best.
That's good.
But if in my red zone, I'm like, let's just get this thing over. right? So I never record in my red zone unless I'm talking to Simon Sinek, and that's when he wants to record. Then I'm like, well, I better have a nap beforehand, right? So you flex with your schedule and that kind of thing. But if you divide your day into zones and then you consistently do what you're best at when you're at your best, that is where the disproportionate return comes. And here's what's fun. If you really want to optimize your green zone, don't just use your gift, develop it. So yes, you have a message coming up this weekend. I got a chapter that the publisher wants to see. But if you do this consistently, it's Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule that he popularized.
Yeah.
That's when you're like, I'm going to go listen to my favorite communicator and I'm going to study how she does it. Or I'm going to read a book on top communication skills, or I'm going to read a biography of an executive that I really appreciate, or I'm going to listen to a bunch of podcasts that aren't necessarily related to getting me through this project, but I know are on topic. And if you do that hour a day, you can become like best in the world, and you just start flexing your muscles, and you go through not one draft of the plan, but through 3 drafts, and you really sharpen and polish it. That's if you use your green zone for that and can work undistracted for those 3 to 5 hours, that's when you really start to develop your gift and you stop cheating it. I'll say one more thing, because here's what's true of all of us. If you're really good at something, you can wing it.
That's true.
Like if you get pinched and your whole week blew up, let's say you ended up with a funeral, you got a wedding on Saturday, your day went sideways, there was a mini crisis, it's Saturday and you're like, I haven't been in this position since I was 25, but I got nothing for Sunday. You're good enough that you could get up there and pull something off. Or you could spend 2 hours writing something. It's like, yeah, it's good enough. And most people would go, oh, that was a good message. And that's the problem. You've cheated your gift. You're using it, but you're never developing it. And if you really want to be world-class, how does Oprah do interviews? Did you know? I did not know this until recently. Apparently, at the end of every Oprah show, which went on for decades, she would spend an hour taking questions from the audience and asking them questions at the end of every show. And she said, that's how I knew what my people wanted.
No way.
That's genius.
That is brilliant.
Now, how do I get that? I get that because I'm committed to learning the craft of interviewing. I listened to multiple interviews with Larry King before he died to make sure that I understood his philosophy of interviewing. Otherwise, I could just keep going, but I keep trying to learn from the best.
Well,
so
and you're good. You and your team are good at interacting with your audience, like your primary audience. You do a great job at following up and responding and recognizing and listening to your audience and what their needs are and what their desires are. So I think
that is very intentional, and we take our time. We take extra time to do it, and we even have a way that we communicate with outside folks. Like when we're setting this up, hopefully people were quick, courteous, and kind. And it was a really nice voice. Actually, we got this set up very quickly to do this.
It was all 3 of those. So way to go.
Yeah.
You're setting you're setting a great
very
culture.
Proud of my team.
Hey, really quick, I want to go back to the green zone for something, because I think this is important. You talk about optimal green zones. There's for the people who don't know, you kind of know, hey, these are the things that I need to work on in my green zone, because these are the things. But for somebody who's trying to figure that out, maybe somebody in their 20s or early 30s who are trying to figure out, you give it's sort of a Venn diagram of 3 circles that help you locate that. Can you talk about those 3 dynamics?
Yeah, totally. And we got whole exercises and series of questions that you can ask.
Great.
So
and that's in the book?
Yeah, it's in the book.
Perfect.
So gifting, passion, and impact.
Gifting, passion,
Gifting, what are you good at? And our mutual friend Andy Stanley says, what seems easy to you or effortless to you, but looks complicated to others? Great example. I always wanted to be a musician. I have no musical gifts. That's why my album is not dropping anytime soon. But when I see somebody up there and they're playing an instrument and singing at the same time, like, I just have no idea how the brain can even work that way. And you talk to really gifted musicians and they tell you it's easy. On the other hand, I can go and give a 45-minute talk extemporaneously, no notes. And people are like, how do you do that? It's like, it's just not that hard, right? So that's your gifting. For some people, it's spreadsheets. Like you can do a pivot table like nobody else, or it's strategic planning. Or I have a number of people on my team. They're not visionaries, but my goodness, do they execute? Give me the plan, get it done. we're going to fry those fish, right? Like that is their specialty. So that's gifting. The other is passion. Like you could be gifted at something, but not really enjoy it. So what are you passionate about? And your passion is a little bit different from your gifting. And often if those two combine, you can get a really good skill set. Like I love communication. When I was in law, what did I love the most? Not drafting contracts. I love being in court. It's like, I want to hear what the other side says. I want to change the judge's mind. This is the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
I think I can win, right? Like I was in court almost every day. It was so much fun. When I was a pastor, favorite part was preaching. Now I enjoyed vision casting and leading a team, but like preaching, all day long. What do I do now? I run a communications company. I do online courses. I do podcasting. What's the common thread in all that? It's not law, ministry, or entrepreneurship or authorship. It's communication. And so you're going to find a thread line through your life like that. And then the third is impact. So I really love barbecuing. I'm probably not going to have a restaurant that's profitable. That's probably just not happening in my lifetime. I really like boating. I really enjoy that. I enjoy cycling, but nobody's calling me for the Olympics. So what I need to do, particularly at my age, what I need to do is figure out, okay, I really love doing it. I'm gifted at it, but what has an impact? And I knew when I led a church for 20 years, if I communicated well, the church did better. If I communicated poorly, the church did worse. So top thing, they would say, Carey, just crush this one out. Do a really good job communicating. Vision, strategy, mission, your preaching. I know right now, if I do really good interviews, I write solid blog posts. Yes, I still blog. And I crack out a good book every 3 to 5 years, that is going to move the needle in terms of what I believe I'm supposed to accomplish with my life. And I got to keep my team aligned, which I really enjoy leading a team right now. Like that has been so much fun over the last few years as we built this team for this phase of life. So that's impact. And I know if I do those things well, all the other things on the dashboard turn green. We're going to make money somehow. But if I focus on making money, then, the other stuff starts to suffer. And so we'll make money, we'll make progress, we'll grow. Everyone will be happy. It'll all work out. I just need to do those things. So it's when those three things come together, passion, gifting, and impact, that's when you found your sweet spot. And if you use, and if you're not your own boss, which a lot of you aren't, what makes for a great classroom? What makes for great patient care? What makes for great sales, right? You're in the middle or at the bottom of an organization. When I was in law, I was bottom because I was only there for a year until I switched gears to seminary. I was at the bottom of the hierarchy. And so I didn't have a lot of control, but I'm like, man, I really love being in court. This is so much fun. So I kept saying, give me your courtroom work. Give me your courtroom work. And so as a result, I was in court almost every day. And I didn't work a lot of hours back then. I kind of knew this stuff, but I lost it for 20 years afterwards because I was newly married. We had a son on the way. I wanted to get home. So I'd get in early. Long story short, Joel, at the end of the year, one of the senior partners sat me down and he goes, Carey, I know you're supposed to go to seminary. He says, I'm here to change your mind. He says, students lose us money year after year after year after year. He said, you made us money. You made us $100,000. You made us more than junior lawyers make us. What do we need to do to convince you to abandon your future life calling and stay here? Here's the salary we're going to pay you. And I walked away. I'm like, thank you so much. I'm really honored, but I'm gone.
Wow.
That was using my green. That was the combination because the impact, my boss noticed when I not only paid back my salary, but made them another 6 figures. They were like, okay, this guy's making an impact. I hope that doesn't come across as immodest, but that actually is a great example of what happens when you're in your 20s and you use those three together, you can have that kind of impact.
I don't think it's immodest. It's a good example, but I also think too, like sometimes you can't measure that in monetary gain. Like there's other sectors, whether you're in healthcare or you're a teacher or you're in the public sector or you're in politics. Like there's other ways in which that manifests impact.
Net promoter score, customer satisfaction,
100%.
patient quality of patient care, reviews, or simply making your boss's life easier.
Yeah. So Lee, I want to finish with one final question. As a former pastor, which you're still a pastor, you're a pastor to so many people in so many ways. But The last thing I'd love for you to answer is from a faith or spiritual perspective, help us understand why this matters. Like for leaders who are here that are also followers of Christ and trying to be leaders in the world outside the church, why does being at your best matter?
Because it's not just about work. I mean, it does matter. I want to be a good steward of my work. But you know who pays the price when you're overwhelmed, overcommitted, and overworked? The people closest to you. Because you come home every day, you're exhausted. You're one of those 82% who are just depleted. And I did that. Like before I discovered these principles, I would come home and I would have left everything on the field at the church. I would come home and then I'd kind of lie on the couch and I wanted to be served. And that is not the right posture. I need energy left in the tank to love my wife, to love my boys. And I've told my boys this now. You know, I started to get this together when they were in their teen years. They're now in their 20s. But I'm like, what I wouldn't do to get my 30s back and have these principles and just be that more present dad. I got a whole section on how to say no so that you know what to delete from your life, because you can't do, as Greg McKeown says, you can't do everything, but you can do anything. So you got to choose very carefully. And that's what's at stake. And at the end of the day, I want you to have margin in your life. And this book has freed up so much margin. I mean, I'm going to go off this. I have one other appointment. I get full weekends now. I did when I was in ministry. I have 28 out of 30 evenings off for personal time, for family. I work half days Friday in the summer. I just came back from a month off, a full month off, no cheating. Like you can do this. And I'm leading 100x more than I was when I burned out.
Oh, and it's growing.
Yeah.
Tremendously.
And it's growing.
Yep.
Yeah. And my team's happy.
Yep.
It's not like I
Yep.
just was the crappy boss who dumped all over them and here you guys deal with
No,
this
they've been given opportunities to grow. Many of them have stepped in and taken over things for you that have freed you up, and that's caused them to grow.
Totally. And they're stepping into their gifting and they're getting time off.
That's
so what happens is with that kind of margin in your life, your relationship with God gets better. Your self-awareness grows. Your emotional healing grows. My favorite chapter is the little one at the very end, where I talk about it's not just about what you're doing, it's about who you're becoming. And who you're becoming, I'm becoming a different human, kinder, more compassionate on my good days, better husband, better father, better boss, better Christ follower. And what? You want to be stressed out till you're 70 and pulling your hair out and then grumpy and complaining and, you know, angry at the world? No, you need space to breathe. And that's what I want to see you at your best.
Man, that's
why
good.
we called it that.
Well, thank you so much for this gift. This book literally is a gift to so many into the world. I just can't wait to see the impact of it. I can't wait to finish it myself. Thanks also for your time today. You've been so generous to squeeze us in and make this happen today. I'm really grateful for your friendship and for your investment in us today.
Appreciate you so much, Joel. Excited for all that's ahead.
Thanks, bud.